I remember picking this 384-page issue of PC Gamer off the shelves in late 1997. Inside, dozens of 3DFX accelerated screenshots tickled my senses as my frothing demand increased. By Christmas '97, I had my own copy of Quake 2, and more than 25 years later, I'm still playing it. And now, thanks to a collaboration between Nightdive Studios, id Software, and Machine Games, I have another new way to play. This latest release of Quake 2 boasts a wide range of new content and features, and it's designed to offer an experience that mirrors your memories of Quake 2, but offers some significant improvements. It's a love letter to Quake 2, and today we're putting it to the test. So in this video, I'll discuss the new features, the new content, the updated visuals, we'll check it out across all the various consoles and PC, and more. So polish up those deathmatch skills and let's talk some Quake 2. Like every id Software release before it, Quake 2 made history. It was id's first game built with 3D accelerator cards in mind from the beginning. It features a rich, interconnected campaign unlike anything they'd built before, and it helped support the burgeoning era of esports that had started with Quake. Its main campaign introduces players to the Strogg, a nightmarish army built from wire and flesh. The game asks players to cross their home planet, Stroggos, to destroy the planetary defense system, assassinate its commander, and take out tons of enemies along the way. Quake 2 is not a game rich in story, but it is the first id-developed shooter attempting anything even close to it. Unlike Doom or Quake, you'll traverse and retraverse a series of interconnected maps. Accomplishing an objective in one map can trigger an event or provide the necessary items to unlock the next area in a prior map. Quake 2 is, of course, a PC game at its heart, and remains such today, but there were console conversions released in the past, including a PlayStation and Nintendo 64 version, as well as a port to Xbox 360, but it was not available on modern consoles. Now, just shy of its 25th anniversary, Quake 2 has returned thanks to Nightdive and its partners. It features a wide range of changes and improvements under the hood designed to enhance the visuals and audio while staying true to the original presentation. These include major improvements to the light map system, liquid rendering, animation, and so much more, a lot of which we'll be covering today. Content-wise, it features the original campaign alongside both expansion packs, in addition to the Nintendo 64 version of the game and an entirely new episode created by Machine Games. All this content is contained within a neatly organized menu system that feels like an extension of the original but smoothed out and refined. They've even included a museum of sorts featuring development documents, trailers, artwork, and even playable levels pulled from early pre-release demos, such as the E3 1997 build of Quake 2. Another strength of its menu system lies in the graphics options. Quake 2 allows a full adjustment of visual features across every single platform. As you can see, it's possible to tweak the game to your liking, even going so far as to approximate the look of the original software renderer thanks to monochrome light maps, no texture filtering, and square particles. They've even included a CRT shader option, which looks pretty good if you're in the mood for some chunky pixels. And if you're playing on PC, you can tweak this option further using the in-game console. There's a shadow mask setting, for instance, that is not enabled when you select the option in the menu. More importantly, there are hundreds of settings you can adjust from the in-game console on PC, something I was pleased to see. But okay, let's get to the meat of things here. I'm going to break down the rest of this video into individual sections focused on different aspects of the conversion. I'd like to begin with an analysis of the re-release of Quake 2 running across each modern console and PC while discussing the differences in performance you can expect. Then we'll get into the visual differences and improvements made for this version of Quake 2, and finally we'll finish up with any remaining discussion points on our way to the end. Got it? Okay, let's start with the consoles. In bringing Quake 2 to modern platforms, Nightdive has built a version of the game for all Xbox consoles dating back to Xbox One, all PlayStation consoles dating back to PlayStation 4, the Nintendo Switch, and of course the PC. And here's what you need to know. Quake 2 basically supports the maximum resolution and frame rate of each console, though there is a minor caveat. So that means PS4, Xbox One, and Switch, which all max out at 1080p 60, support 1080p 60. Xbox One X and PS4 Pro then deliver 4K output at 60 frames per second, while Xbox Series X and PS5 support 4K at 120 frames per second. Xbox Series S also supports 120, but using this mode, the dynamic resolution kicks in, producing a result between 1080p and 4K depending on the load. Now keep in mind that all versions do support dynamic resolution scaling, and you'll notice this kick in more often on last generation consoles, but all versions have the potential to drop to an absolute minimum of 50% axis scale, which means for versions that support, say, 4K output, the minimum resolution is 1080p. The Switch version is the one that can drop the lowest, and I've counted as low as 540p in very select instances. PS5 and Series X, however, do a great job of sticking close to native 4K, I found. And when played at 60Hz, the Series S does too. But the comparison I found really interesting is PS4 Pro versus Xbox One X, where Xbox One X has a gigantic resolution lead in most scenes. The Pro is far more likely to drop down to 1080p in comparison. Performance then is largely stable, especially on the current generation consoles, which have no trouble locking to 60 or 120 FPS in our tests. The older machines, however, such as PS4, Xbox One, or the Switch, do exhibit drops at certain points during the Machine Games campaign due to the massive increase in enemy density and additional complexity of the levels. That said, the motion blur has the most significant impact on performance, and disabling this helps reduce the drops in frame rate and increases the average resolution. This does not, however, apply to the Switch version, which does not offer motion blur as an option. So that's basically what you can expect from the different versions. And even with the highlighted issues, the game is in great shape on every possible platform. It's simply a case that the newer machines will allow higher fidelity and performance, as you'd expect. The performance issues I highlighted only really apply to specific areas in the Machine Games campaign. Now, when breaking down all these different versions, it's fair to say that the Switch version sacrifices the most, but even there, it's largely a 60 FPS experience and it plays great. But the real meat of this update lies in its visual enhancements and changes. While it may just look like Quake 2 at first glance, if you dig deeper, you'll find that many things have been drastically overhauled. At launch, Bethesda posted a comprehensive blog covering most of these changes, and today I'd like to demonstrate how this influences the presentation, so let's walk through some of them. The first major enhancement stems from the way lighting is handled. Light maps form the foundation of Quake 2's visuals. I covered this topic in my retrospective on the original Quake, but with the transition to Quake 2, id Software implemented support for colored light maps on hardware-accelerated PCs. Now, computers of this era were not fast enough to render this world lighting in real time, thus everything needed to be pre-calculated and baked during the compilation process. Despite this, the pre-calculation steps still required hours of time on PCs of that era, and of course consumer systems also had limitations in terms of available VRAM. So in this new version of the game, these limitations are removed and the light map resolution sees a boost, a 4x boost in fact, according to the developers. This was achieved through a collaboration with two contributors to the Eric W. Tools, a set of tools focused on lighting features designed for Quake 2. What this means in practice is that these new baked light maps offer much higher density and can capture more of the actual environment. This improves the perception of global illumination and detail in the shadows. In the original version, small details in the brushes were typically not captured in the light map due to these limitations, but in this new version there's a lot more detail in the lighting. This is further enhanced by the use of Phong shading, which is nothing new of course, but the result here allows smoother shading of low detail structures like this without altering the map itself. Note how the shading on this crashed pod is much smoother compared to the original game. This new version also supports the baking of ambient occlusion, thanks again to Eric W. Tools. Ambient occlusion, whether screen space or otherwise, is a key part of modern game engines. But the idea here is to recreate these contact shadows during the baking process. So all this additional subtle shadowing is now figured into that bake. Then there's the liquid materials such as water or lava, which are properly lit. In the original, even in a darkened area of the map, water surfaces appeared at full brightness, which looks incorrect. This has been changed and they now behave more as you'd expect given the light maps. Speaking of water, version 2023 solves one of my pet peeves with the original OpenGL release, animated water. When using the software renderer, both in Quake and Quake 2, textures marked as fluids could be animated by manipulating the X and Y values of the texture surface to create this nifty animated effect. However, early 3D graphics cards could not perform this operation, so it was simplified to rely on manipulating the vertices instead. Thankfully, modern graphics cards have no problem replicating this feature, and that's exactly what the 2023 version of Quake 2 does. The water surface textures now behave similarly to the software renderer, but even smoother, and it looks great. Also, when you go below the waterline, the entire screen is manipulated to warp the viewport, which was also not possible on older graphics cards. This feature is now present and accounted for in this new release of the game. What's interesting here though is that according to Samuel Villarreal, the lead programmer on Kex Engine, this new version of the effect was adapted from the N64 version of Quake. He actually reverse engineered the view warping used in that version and adapted it to the new game. Then we have the dynamic lights. Quake 2 was known for its dynamic, colorful lighting. Fire a blaster down a dark hallway and you're treated to a light show that was absolutely dazzling for the time. The new version, however, looks rather different in comparison, don't you think? Why is that? Well, the original game basically generates a dynamic light map that blends with the static light map. The issue is that it shows obvious artifacts due to the low resolution of the light map as it moves along the surface. This new version of Quake, however, uses per pixel lighting instead. As a result, light moving across surfaces no longer shows the resolution limitations of the light map and instead produces a smooth fall-off around each burst of light. Oh, and each of these lights now casts proper shadows thanks to the new shadow map system, which is a great improvement. These real-time projected shadow maps help further ground dynamic objects in the game world. Even better, they've added muzzle flash textures to weapon fire. So this combination of muzzle flash, shadows, and improved dynamic lighting really enhances the visual presentation when firing weapons. Lighting is further enhanced by the addition of light volumes introduced in Quake 3 Arena. This is basically a 3D grid which samples the light maps during the compilation process, and by referencing this light grid, dynamic objects can now be appropriately lit and colored. This means that enemies are influenced by world lighting in a way that wasn't possible in the original version of Quake 2, where they just sort of glow. This basically forms the foundation of a modern probe system. The fact that this was implemented back in 1999 in Quake 3 is pretty wild when you think about it. But not all glow is bad glow. You see, they've also added glow maps to the game, which are basically a texture mask which defines whether a surface should glow or not. Surfaces with the glow map enabled, such as a computer screen or a weapon indicator, will remain visible even in dark conditions, which was not possible in the original game. Height fog then is another very important visual technique that allows developers to effectively place volumes of fog within desired areas of the map and assign two different colors to create dramatic effects. All of these features work in tandem to create something that still looks very much like Quake 2, but enhances it in just the right way to make it feel a little more modern. It's also worth noting that this new version of the game does not use OpenGL, but instead relies on both DX11 or Vulkan. According to Sam, this new version also no longer uses binary space partitioning or BSP either. Levels are now broken up into cells instead, which speeds up geometry gathering for the shadow maps and rendering in general. He even came up with a bindless texture solution that greatly reduces the number of draw calls and improves CPU performance as well, which was especially crucial for the Switch version. But while all these visual features are fantastic and contribute to the overall presentation, the most significant enhancement in my opinion comes from the reworked assets. Specifically, the game now supports the skeleton-based MD5 model format. In the original game, which uses the older MD2 format, vertex information is stored as individual bytes, which reduces the file size, great for 1997, but also reduces precision. With low vertex precision then, models such as weapons and enemies exhibit this noticeable warbling effect when in motion. These original MD2 models can still be used in the 2023 version if you choose, but the new MD5 skeleton-based models have all been reworked and greatly enhanced, offering both additional detail and newfound stability thanks to this increase in precision. This is perhaps most noticeable on the player's weapon. These large models fill the player's view at all times, but the lack of precision in the original version meant that they were constantly wobbling. Every weapon in the game has now been redesigned from the ground up for this new release, with an increase in both texture and geometric detail, while still maintaining the original aesthetic. It still feels appropriately 1997 and right at home in Quake 2. And just for good measure, here's a look at the plasma beam that was introduced in the add-on pack Ground Zero. The increase in detail over that original model is staggering. Yet again, it still fits the aesthetic of Quake 2. But it's not just dynamic objects that have received a boost. The artists have gone over every level and added additional geometric flourishes where appropriate. Without a direct comparison, you might not even have noticed that anything had changed, but this extra detail pass is certainly welcome. Even better, the team uncovered unfinished map data in the id archives and have restored areas that did not exist in the final campaign. This example in the first level is one of my favorites. Having played this map thousands of times over the years, I was surprised to notice geometry just outside the window in this first hallway. Upon closer inspection, there's a whole new area to explore out there, and even a canal that connects the new areas to the previously accessible outdoor areas in the original game. For longtime Quake 2 fans, it's a real treat to discover new areas hidden within maps you're already familiar with. But okay, one last visual feature I'd like to mention centers on the introduction movie. The original version of this is displayed at such a low resolution that it's almost difficult to even understand what you're looking at. For this re-release, however, Brendan McKinney went back and remade all of the game's FMV sequences from scratch, rendering them out as high-resolution videos in widescreen. Considering that everything here was basically eyeballed and recreated from the ground up, I'd say he did a remarkable job. Even the intermission screens, both for the main game and the two mission packs, have been entirely remade, and they look awesome. With that, I think it's fair to say that no matter which version you play, there's been a lot of love poured into the new presentation. But before we move on to our final section, I want to address a final elephant in the room in the form of Quake 2 RTX. So this is a special version of Quake 2 released by Nvidia some years ago, featuring path-traced lighting and entirely new assets to go with it. It looks amazing, and you might be disappointed that such a feature is not available in this new version of the game. The thing to remember, however, is that this re-release is designed to represent the original artistic vision of Quake 2, while Quake 2 RTX is clearly more of its own thing. Furthermore, they designed this version to run across many different console platforms where path tracing isn't feasible, and would have had to make a whole bunch of new assets for all the mission packs and the machine games levels. Now personally, I love both of these releases, and they're both available for free if you already own Quake 2 on Steam. That said, I'd love to see the Kex team take a stab at path tracing in one of their future projects. Who knows if it'll happen, but one can dream. But we're not done with Quake 2 yet. There's still one last section I want to go through, and that's all the other non-visual elements. So, the 2023 version of Quake 2 changes a lot more than just the visuals. There's enemy behavior, there's animation, there's audio changes, there's new modes, there's new controls, and things like split screen, all have been added to the mix. What does it look like? Well, let's talk AI briefly first. You see, it turns out, due to late changes in development, the original AI being planned and designed for Quake 2 was never actually finished, and a simplified version of that is featured in the final game. Well, thanks again to those id archives, these cut behaviors and improved pathfinding have been added to the game. Check out this sequence then. So, the first thing, on the way to the exit, I damage but don't kill this enforcer. Keep that in mind for later. Now, if we jump forward a little bit as I make my way into the final room, I engage this gunner. I then drop down into the lower level to avoid his shots, and he lobs a few grenades my way, as they always do, nothing new. But suddenly, as I turn around, he jumps down into the pit to face me head on, which is new behavior. But then, remember that enforcer I didn't kill earlier? Well, he bursts into the room just as I kill the gunner. I then duck beneath this platform to avoid his fire, when all of a sudden, a light guard comes up from behind me with his laser blaster, just as the enforcer jumps down into the pit as well. They have me surrounded. Of course, these are low-level enemies, and I quickly dispatch them both, but this sort of behavior didn't happen in Quake 2, which makes it really interesting to replay the campaign. Enemies will now traverse multiple rooms and find different ways to get to you, which mixes things up in a big way. I really like this change. Then of course there's the sound. This new release supports more simultaneous voices, it features reverb, and increased flexibility regarding room size and materials, as well as sound playback. So footsteps across various surfaces will sound and behave differently depending on the size and type of room. In addition, the original CD audio soundtrack makes a return, including the new tracks that were created for the expansion packs, as well as the N64 version of Quake 2. Then there's the multiplayer. For this video, thanks to help from My Life in Gaming's Corey Carlson, I had a chance to test the game in both co-op mode and in deathmatch. The netcode was fast and responsive despite us being in completely different countries, and it worked across all the different campaigns. But if you want some local action, there's also split-screen multiplayer, but unfortunately I was not able to test this due to time constraints and lack of controllers. I just couldn't get the required number of people to put it to the test by the time this video needed to be finished. However, I did want to mention the fact that Xbox and PC owners can enjoy the game with up to 8 players in split screen, which is honestly just amazing. This is not possible on PlayStation platforms, however, due to each controller behaving as 2 individual Bluetooth devices, one for the control side and others for the audio. With no option for developers to disable the audio side, however, you can only connect 4 controllers to these systems. Bummer. Speaking of controls, the gamepad aiming is surprisingly great, and new quality of life features help those that are perhaps a little intimidated by Quake 2. The compass, for instance, is an optional thing you can enable which helps point the way towards your next objective in case you get lost. Hey, it's not for me, but that doesn't mean it's not useful for some players. The single biggest reason to check out this new version of Quake 2, however, centers on the new campaign from Machine Games. You know, the guys behind the recent Wolfenstein titles. Yeah, these guys have a long history of making Quake maps, and they did so for the re-release of Quake 1 as well, but this new campaign for Quake 2 takes things to a new level. If you want to see what this engine can truly achieve with the power of modern technology, look no further. These maps are huge, larger than anything in Quake 2 proper, and the level of detail is also drastically higher. It's just so packed with intricate geometry and towering structures everywhere. The flow and pacing is also just perfect, and you can really feel that these guys have decades of experience creating maps. What's even crazier is the number of enemies that can be thrown at the player. Back in the 1990s, one of the primary issues facing developers moving to a polygon engine is the cost of each enemy on screen. Compared to, say, Doom, where you could just throw a ton of sprites around, this wasn't possible in early games like Quake or Quake 2. With this new version though, all that goes out the window, and these stages have enemy counts rivaling the original Doom. Just tons of foes flooding the scene on a regular basis, leading to absolute chaos. This mission pack is so good that it easily could have been sold as a standalone game, and I absolutely suggest you take it out if you enjoy Quake 2 gameplay. Of course, the addition of Quake 2 64 is also welcome, and if you weren't familiar with it, Quake 2 on Nintendo 64 isn't just a port, it's a wholly original Quake game. It includes a completely new campaign plus additional multiplayer levels, and all that content has made its way into this new version of Quake 2. That said, I do have one minor criticism. It does not duplicate the tri-point texture filtering of the N64 original, as was the case in Nightdive's Doom 64 conversion. But still, the fact that it's here is awesome. So there's a lot to love here, but there are some minor caveats as well. Just to name a couple, the machine gun no longer has recoil, for instance, and speedrunning, I'm told, is no longer possible due to changes in some maps. Furthermore, the way exploding barrels function has changed. There's a delay between when you shoot them and they explode, and weirdly enough, the crosshair actually works correctly now. In the original release, shots are slightly off-center. But then you have actual bugs like keyboard and mouse support on consoles. You can play the game using a keyboard and mouse, but in its current state, there seems to be a bug that causes the keyboard to stop functioning after a few minutes, requiring you to unplug and reinsert the USB cable, which basically renders it unplayable. This seemed to occur on both Xbox and PlayStation. Though speaking of controls, I should mention that there is at least gyro controls on Switch and PlayStation, though as someone who does not enjoy using it, I can't really judge whether it's a good implementation or not. Still, the overall feeling here is that the 2023 version of Quake 2 is very well made and largely faithful to the source material. It's also exceptionally cheap. It's just $10, but also offered as a free upgrade for Steam and GOG owners, plus it's on Game Pass. Despite playing it off and on for the past 25 years, I enjoyed revisiting Quake 2 once again and especially loved the new campaign. Anyone that enjoys shooters and has not played Quake 2, and even if you have, really needs to give it a shot. At the very least, this is an important piece of gaming history and one that should be experienced by all. But that's going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.